loosen it. Who's going to be in that? Okay. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Is that, yes? I'm very honored to introduce and very happy to welcome back to Barry, Ben Ramke. Currently professor of creative writing at the University of Denver and editor of Denver Quarterly, Professor Ramke has also served as editor of the University of Georgia Press Contemporary Poetry Series since 1984. The author of 6 books of poetry, as well as some 200 poems in literary journals, his work has appeared in numerous anthologies, including the Yale Younger Poets Anthology and the Wesleyan Anthology of Modern Poets. His first book, The Difference Between Night and Day, was winner of the Yale Younger Poets Award, and he has twice won the Iowa Poetry Award, first for Massacre of the Innocents, and again for his most recent book, Wake. For Ramke, poetry begins in a fallen world, one in which the word, having lost the singular clarity of its genesis, nevertheless radiates meaning, or rather draws into itself a multiplicity of meanings, until language has the weight and density of collapsed stars. Wake is both imperative and noun. Our reading of the word is unstable, but this is the very thing which animates it, so that the word flits in sexual moment to moment. As one poem says, the way to God is ambiguity. Proceeding more and more by collage, Ramke's is an inclusive poetry, bringing together lines from Shelley and encyclopedia entries, the confessions of Jeffrey Dahmer, as well as the journals of John James Audubon, one of Wake's keynotes. The evocation of Audubon, the naturalist who killed thousands of birds in the service of his artistic cataloging, serves to remind audience and artist that the relationship between art and the world may be as ruthless as it is essential. As the speaker in the poem Wake asks, what can you do with a boy who wants the world beautiful, who would kill to make it so? One definition of wake is a celebratory ceremony following the loss of a loved one. The book begins from such loss and continuance with the first poem's title, The Ruined World, and its opening line, it makes the music anyway. Wake also means an alternative to both sleep and dream, to watch over the dead, a track left by a boat in water, the path of light left by a moving, luminous body. If we no longer have the ship, the moving body, the loved one, what we do have are the remains, the wake, the ruined world, which insists on continuing its music, offering up random riches, and the occasional flash, like the epauletted blackbird, all the sweeter now for its rarity. It's all I have, the noise I make, the poet says. But this noise, this poetry, is luminous and moving. It's human failing, a path of light, which, in its heightened reception to the world, rouses us from our own dull daydreams of transparent narrative language, of wanting words to do something, like hold water or prevent injury. Even in this ruined world, filled with beige plants and charcoal birds, sunsets continue. Language, like the light in one poem, never wanes in the same way twice. I know the story, the poet tells us, It is the light I care about. Please welcome in Ramke.
Thank you. It's really quite an extraordinary introduction. It's intimidating. This is a beautiful place for a meeting. I love this. And I'm very happy to be back here. It was a wonderful trip in time that I spent here last year, and equally wonderful this year. So it's quite an extraordinary place. Berry College is. Well, I like to get these things started by trying to get the audience on my side, so you're less scary out there. And I found the best way to do that is to promise that that it'll all be over soon. That we'll go for about 55 minutes, and then you can go away. Or ask questions afterward if you would like to do that. Mark Twain said it's a terrible death to be talked to death, and to be read to death is probably worse. I'm trying to sort of follow some kind of theme, actually, this evening. It seems to me that the poems that I've chosen to read all have to do with the body and with the breath. There's this extraordinary phenomenon, that as a species we learned to exhale in a noisy way that changed everything. The words are nothing but the breath coming out of us, I just think that's so extraordinary. Well, anyway, I shouldn't go on and on about that, but there is some way in which that figures in most of the poems here. That and the physicality of the body itself and what we do with it, as well as the idea of storytelling. Not so much the telling of stories in these poems, but the idea of it. So I want to begin with a poem called Something to Say. So where is there but the body to live? Many have searched. The young seem to like it, slitting their wrists in joy, then languishing long afternoons in the melting heat of love. Even you and I, in that city of damp and delicate air, we too spent an afternoon or two of spending. There is no place else to live, but we mustn't say so. There's nothing left after the mind goes and the spirit reveals itself for its own thin soup of despair. Refuge and reconciliation and the lingering doubt when the tendons strain against the weight of the head, the tendency of each part to go its own way, of the hands to shake, palmate and practical, the toes to catch on hosiery, while teeth wear themselves to powder. There are children, of course, who watch the wind one afternoon, the leaves turning graceful in some handy tree. Watch the face of some child laughing under there and think of your mother back home, your father dead, all your brothers busy with their lives, no one thinking about what the child must do with the body, wrapped around him like blankets from firemen after disaster some winter night. It's why we invented language, the gallop of the tongue across sharp teeth, the exotic dance in there of flesh and bone and breath. There's nothing like talking to take it all away, all the body's ailments, its little pains and purple bruises, its criminal tendencies. Words filter from the skin and sweat pours defensively down from the brow, and we eat our bread, and all this time we thought it was sex that saved us. We thought we were thrown out for pleasure, and really all along pain was its own reward. There'll be a short quiz afterward. This seems to have quite a number of biblical references, so somehow it seems appropriate. I'm going to read another odd little poem. Actually, it's not so little. From this book from a while back called The Erotic Light of Gardens, which was probably disappointing to most people who were attracted to the term erotic in here. Among the wonders of the internet is the fact that I found a listing for my book in a website that was set up for Valentine's Day presents. And it would be nice if someone actually bought the book. It would be nice if someone actually bought the book. I'll just leave it at that. This poem is called Harvard Classic 16, The 1001 Nights. And the Harvard Classics part of it is just because the edition in which I first read from the Arabian Nights, The 1000 Nights and a Night, as it was called, happened to be in something called the Harvard Classics. But remember, this is the story, this is Scheherazade, who was scheduled to be beheaded in the morning after a night of lust with the king, or as they sometimes say, love. And she saved her life by telling stories and keeping it interested for 1000 nights and a night. It's about storytelling. There's an epigraph from the Quran. Praise be to God who hath raised the heavens without pillars and spread out the earth as a bed. 1. The lives of former generations are a lesson to posterity. The lives of the dead serve none of their own purposes, that a man may review the remarkable events which have happened, that someone learn something and be admonished, or at least amazed. Consider the history of people of preceding ages and be restrained. As if the telling of tales could save lives and virginity and teach that nobility lies in complexity, since it was to complexity that Scheherazade prayed, while her sister Dunizad served only the gods complication and confusion. The color of flesh is always shocking. The veils slipped through no one's fault, aside to reveal the searing light of skin, or the horrifying glimpse in the mirror after your bath, and the dreadful fit of that skin, or perhaps for the lucky, the sudden lust. So a woman lay in his bed and told stories all night, which is the same as the astronomer in his celibacy, asking the only questions worth asking, those with no end of answers, or at least none before sunrise. What lacks passion lasts. In my own childhood, I told myself stories long into the night. Later, they became erotic and full of other heroics than violence. I climbed the trees whose scent and fallen needles and touch of scaling bark could take the skin off. Sometimes a seed fell, a brown wing broken from among the sharp edges of a cone. Curious geometry, these fruit, twisting in sunlight, frightening its bad dreams. I played soldier among the trees, killing quite adroitly quaint masses of enemy. Plenty to choose in the 50s. Germans, Japanese, Koreans, the faint remaining trace of Indians. The lives of former generations are a lesson to posterity. But war, well made by boys, becomes a further innocence, a pastoral procession from a distance, like sheep grazing beneath the cedars of a far hill, a simple oriental pleasure like Lebanon. And women will tell stories in the night without end, or else I slept through it all, perhaps lived better than I knew or loved. So the child volunteered her flesh and life to save, perhaps, the virgins of the tribe, she the daughter of the vizier's complicity. And was he evil, or the king himself a moral monster? The books don't say, only that he killed them out of fear of repetition, the sultry modern mania for the original, for verse without reverse. There followed 1,000 further versions. There followed the consideration of histories of preceding ages and the contemplation of the woman's flesh, the veil and flimsy fabric, that he might be constrained, spread out as he was on the earth like a bed. The end of that one. Well, enough of these cheery, light-hearted poems. We're going to move to something serious. Cannibalism. I'm going to want to read a poem. It's not terribly long, but it requires just a slight bit of introduction. This has to do with the work of a painter named Géricault, a French painter who flourished, as they say, during the time of the French Revolution. And Géricault's best known, certainly his biggest painting, was called The Raft of the Medusa. And just a slight bit of historical background. The Medusa was a ship which sank during that time, and a small group of people from the ship were saved on this life raft. And after they were picked up by a passing ship and brought back home, stories began to circulate through Europe about extreme measures taken by those who were out there for weeks on the raft, about cannibalism, in fact, the need to save the ones who were still there, who were living. Meanwhile, Géricault himself, the incidents that I presented here seem to be true. That well, he was an artist and he needed material to practice on, and so parts of dead bodies which were available were there for him to practice his drawings on. Anyway, I'll just simply read it and you'll pick up the cheery details as we go along. Life raft. Once there was a difference between pain and desire. The world was not safe. Ships sank. Fathers sacrificed sons to gods, and mothers abandoned whole households. Children trussed and tossed into closets, dark as the undiscovered psyche. And there were dangerous men who believed that art, say the raft of the Medusa, was compensation for events, say the falling of hungry men upon the flesh of the dead on that famously fragile craft. The world's necessary nourishment will be provided. There are needs greater than accuracy. Géricault gathered heads from the guillotines for study, little piles of flesh all over the studio floor, and had brought to him limbs from the hospitals of Paris, amputations for study. There are several ways to suffer, not all of which are art. As his usual practice meant sketching until the paper darkened like evening, wrapped with lines, he would trace the best parts onto fresh paper and go again, hundreds of versions piggybacked of some twisted leg or two. True, he was once famous for horses, lively and lithe and vegetarian, and at his own end, hospitalized, he had no model but his own hand to draw. How like the man of passion, this recourse to one's own hollow palm, whatever one's art or eros. Nevertheless, after hundreds of studies leading to the final painting, none of those cannibal themes remained. But what does any art consume, if not its own and maker's flesh? See, we already made it through one book. Only have 6 to go. I think a lot of this actually is funny, but I'm not going to tell you which are the funny parts. You have to guess. I want to read a poem called Practical Linguistics, which if any of you have studied linguistics probably already think is funny. Having to do with language, the breath, and a kind of surrealist approach. Practical linguistics. He learned to breathe in German, but no one gave him a seat on the subway. Trying times continued on his walk through the park. Daffodils and dangerous birds. Morning at the museums and angels buzzed impudently above the garbage, the sweet smell of refuse sufficient. His Italian was better than that. He could not account for his whereabouts the night he disappeared. The police don't really care. They have a routine. He cannot leave his apartment without peering first through the curtain with a Dantean sense of doom. In the future, I will live in the past, he said to himself in Spanish. The smell of politics followed him down the streets of a major Central American capital. Tall, secret policemen watched his progress, his ambiguous back. During his most angelic dream, he awoke in Farsi while the rugs around him flew like butterflies, the room filled with Persian carpets flapping. Agonized women leaned down toward his face to whisper secrets of his recent past. Actually, that reminds me of an earlier poem. This one is in almost a copy in some ways. I'm going to change the order a little and read this as a kind of a test. A poem called A Language Student. And I need to mention just one thing about it. There's a line of French in here. Comment dit-on femme en anglais? I encountered the line just a very long time ago and carried it around with me, knowing that I wanted to use it some way. And I'll tell you, it was in an advertisement. Comment dit-on femme en anglais simply means, how do you say woman in English? And the answer to the question was the name of some perfume, which I can't quite remember. It's kind of a clever ad. But I guess that line was the beginning of this poem. Well, anyway, the language student. A small, dark man I'm often mistaken for foreign. Tourists greet me in Spanish. A serious man in a suit once whispered in Farsi while watching my eyes. As I boarded a plane, the pilot once said, Comment dit-on femme en anglais? At home, I often lie in bed, staring through the ceiling with clasped hands behind my head. Sometimes in winter, I sit before the heater and smoke cigarettes in the dark. But if I could learn the language, I could walk pebbled paths beneath blooming trees as a casual foreign elegance wafts smoky through the air, as ferocious women and tame dogs ask me to follow them home. I guess this is continuing the theme of some theme. We'll see what the theme is. A poem called Matters of Time. It's in a number of short sections, and I have numbered the sections, but I think I will, there'll just be a dramatic pause between sections. You'll think I've lost my place, but I meant to do that. Matters of Time. My first date in New Orleans. I do not remember the girl. I remember her mother, small in the living room, watching an old movie. I felt for the first time the despair, the gray of television, the wait for a daughter's safe return. Knowing where to cut the joint, to remove the leg, and the angle to slice through meat, these elemental terrors of holidays, the herbs fondly growing through the summer. Winter, when the snow conspires to enter my house, the roof makes little dams of ice, the trickle of snow melting in the sunlight stains the walls on its way to my last good carpet. winter and the sound of the stain growing underfoot. Relics of summer. The Nazis meeting on the lawn brought folding chairs and beer and children. Summer and the racists march down the littering paths of the park. They sing to each other of perfect weather in the world to come. In my childhood, the proportion of anger was the same as now. The small birds fell as dead from the trees as regularly, but the smell of the poisoned river was strong, and the curling fumes rose with impunity while the local factory churned in the night its own bad dream. God eats at home alone, listening to the radio, staring out his kitchen window, remembering the time before the breaking of symmetry, the time of vacuum genesis. The shy engineer stares into his own palm, startled by the star-shaped nexus of lines, wrinkles in the skin, another kind of beauty. It all fits. This poem will explain it. I was saying to some of you earlier that I began my college career in mathematics. Thought I was going to do pure mathematics and maybe prove Fermat's last theorem or something of that sort. And then I took calculus. This poem is called In Layman's Terms. X is X. X is also Y. X is always Z. Mathematicians try to keep this a secret. Geometry is how we measure the world. If your mother helped you with homework, she knows this in spite of her protests as she sinks into oblivion. No one told me. They told her in school answers don't matter in themselves, just learn the principles. Here is a family full of error, dining happily one Sunday of an indifferent year in a province of the far-flung empire. The tiniest Tim raises his glass to honor Mom. Sister drools triumphant in her corner. The universe smiles indulgently, immeasurably. Still, when they add it up, someone is missing. There must be war, someone must be dead. Grief spills the soup, crackers crumble exultantly floorward, as if anyone expected happiness, as if anyone had ever thought X could be anything but Y, which is why philosophy started. Talk to me, Mom said to Dad at night when all surviving children were thought to be fast asleep. There's more. I have this little camp up here. Do some housekeeping. I'm going to turn to some of the poems from this most recent book, Wake. And it's the idea of reading and of storytelling that I'm sort of working with. There's a small poem in here called A Little Ovid Late in the Day. Ovid being the author of, among other things, the Metamorphoses. Stories so important that you don't actually have to read them. You encounter them anyway, and you know most of them just from the culture at large. A little Ovid late in the day. It is late in the day to outlive the words, tales of incest, corruption, any big mythic vice against the color of sun, the sweetness of the time of day. I know the story, it is the light I care about. The book falls from my hands and I know all the stories. I know better than that. They glitter in the grass. This is fun in the summer. The sun descending onto my back, the weight of 8 light minutes warm there against the skin. Someone will read aloud to me when I have forgotten the words, the look they make against the page, the kind of stain it is against the paper. 8 light minutes was my calculation. I think that's right. If you divide 192 million miles by 186,000 miles per second, the speed of light, I think it comes to 8 minutes. It's kind of interesting to think when you're standing in the sun that each photon left the surface of the sun 8 minutes before, just to come down and get you. A small poem called Pretty Words Parabolas. A sudden telephone pealed sleep from the household. I've danced somewhere and a father left home. The long drive through morning Tennessee gray. Or did I read it? Was it not, no, never my family's death? The old do die and the young. Here's a happy thought. Happiness coheres. Look at the past as if once upon a time to have a small lawn in a large world is a victory, one kind. A place for poppies, gentians, and a sound of water, pleasing, and mountains, clouds, etc. If you sit to admire, to what will you turn your back? A house, an interior in glass, this will do. At last, the world is glitter of its own making, sufficient machine. Not at last. There is, no, that same hummingbird I met last summer. Learn to live. If the body is a form of itself over time, then there is music, or could be. From this pleasant prospect, we can see more air than anything, moving. Still, my ignorance is no bliss at all. In some ways, that poem had to do with looking at the scenes, looking at the mountains from a friend's house in Aspen, Colorado. When it occurred to me that one of the things that we liked so much about the views was that there was nothing. That there were vast quantities of air that we were looking through. Much admired. I want to read a poem which is more or less a prose poem, and it starts with an epigraph from Anna Akhmatova. Respond to me, my unknown, I am searching for you. There can be questions afterward. I'll just present it, and we'll see how it works. It was during those days when you could still walk alone down railroad tracks and across the creosoted trestles. If you felt no vibration through the track and the sun was setting, you could watch and then keep walking, counting your steps. Someone began to walk along and spoke to me of the future, and there was no danger, and there was a little laughter, a stranger, as in the Bible. We walked in the night, then turned each a different way, and I went to my house and grew up and lived a life, and people who meant no harm have suffered. Aristotle said that gravity is the quality of material things that causes them to move downward. Levity, the quality of material things that causes them to rise. A balance between the two, as with, for instance, air, would cause them to hover. Aristotle was often wrong, as when he counted teeth. Still, the words work. Gravity is such a lovely nexus, seriousness, sadness, and the tendency of things to huddle, such as a family in crisis or hikers in high country. Levity is less useful, having descended in contemporary usage to playfulness, although still related to leverage, to forcefulness, and odd sorts of alleviations. One delight of childhood was the Viewmaster, the binocular device for three-dimensional viewing. You held it to your eyes and pulled a sort of trigger on the side, and you floated through the eyes into the depth of the scene before you. The makers of stereopticons, magic lanterns, stereoscopes, and viewmasters delight in travelogues, deep or wide places with vistas, with framing oaks and long corridors of fastigiate pines and balsamic firs. My favorite emotion was sadness. Nothing grand, the small domestic sense of limitation and loss. Between the comic mask and the tragic, there is a straight line mouth of the merely sad, somber but not sullen, sexy equilibrium amidst the flurries of mania and depression. Uncle Diedrich would grasp my right hand, a handshake, and with his left hand knead my right shoulder, and I could feel information flow through the connection. He not only knew I was unforgivably thin and weak, but he knew why. I felt his braille-trained fingers extract all my secrets, and while his vague smile told me he would not expose me, would keep all he knew to himself, it was still a humiliation. I learned to avoid touch, developed techniques to avoid that electrical danger. This is why the floating world of the blind so disturbs the sighted, you gravely attached to your fulcrum of light. I actually did have two blind uncles. It was sort of interesting growing up around them, seeing the terrible jokes they played on each other. They would love to scare each other. And it did feel as though, in shaking hands or any sort of touch, that they were learning things, which, especially for an adolescent, was a most uncomfortable sensation. Anyway, I have one other poem here in this group, and then a few newer things, and we'll see how we're doing. Another poem from this book called Wait that I want to read, which is one of the few poems I've ever written that actually started with an idea. I thought it was sort of a clever idea, but we'll see. The title of the poem is strange. It's Livery of Season. And season is spelled S-E-I-S-I-N. I heard someone use that phrase, and he was a law student. And it turns out this is a legal term. And the epigraph to the poem is an actual definition of that phrase. Livery as in delivery, and season as in seize, as in to seize property. We still have other words that are related to it. The idea, however, is that, well, it's two ideas. We are said to have 5 or 6 senses, 5 senses. Sight, taste, touch, and so forth. But in a way, there's only one sense, that one that the blind uncle was able to utilize, touch. That actually sight is nothing but the touch of photons, particles of light, on a portion of the skin that has developed special sensitivity to light. Hearing is just a matter of the molecular motion of the air touching these specialized portions of the skin in the ear, in the middle ear. Taste actually is a response to the molecules of salt and sweet. Special taste receptors in the tongue, which means touch, again. Smell, of course, is the worst of all, if you consider it. To smell something means to take in to the body, to your body, little pieces of whatever it is you're smelling. You're actually engulfing whatever that horrible smell is, you know. So that's why it remains the most difficult and annoying of the senses to the modern person. But it's all the same. It's all really touch. The other portion of the idea is that touch is necessarily reciprocal, which is, I think, why it can be so annoying and disturbing. That is, if I touch you, you touch me. You can't help it except by breaking contact. But if that's the case, then the touch is always reciprocal in this way. That if I touch, for instance, light, if light touches me, I'm actually touching the source of the light, of a direct contact to the sun or the stars. So anyway, that's the basis of this one, which is shorter than the explanation. Livery of season. The epigraph, the delivery of property into the corporal possession of a person, the bodily possession. In the case of a house, by giving him the ring, latch, or key of the door. In the case of land, by delivering him a twig, a piece of turf, or the like. Of touch, the annoyance that if I touch you, you touch me, the affront it is, and its reciprocal nature, and it is the basis of the lighter perversions. Frottage, for instance, which is the secret joy of public touching, it is, on a bus, to transport, to touch the whole self. There is no stopping it. If there is no defense, I touch you, you touch me. If I touch, if not you, the glamour of the stars, oh, the stars famously beyond touch, that such light touches the eyes, the retina, parts of the skin, the inevitable body, where we live, no matter, and two, the warm sun striking out, but the stars softly at night and possibly by day, that we touch the stars, and that any light-emitting body, heat and any radiation, is infinite in size or will be, caressing the universe at 186,000 miles per second. O love, O sacred. To change, to hold the house in your hand, the subject. To expand infinitely to the end too terrible to think upon. Each man's life is but a breath. Psalm 39. A touch, a touching most intimate. The breath a column still attached to the warm, wet lung. Every leering man knows what he's doing, dreary. Perpendicular sounds flying past, touch, extensive touch of someone's tongue, expensive. Oh, do talk less, give us room, give us the air, dry and drifting. Flowers inventing themselves on the tips of trees, reach out, nature reaches, trees reach out like stars, light, their touch and candor, all their own. I'll stop that one. Just a couple of things from recent work, which is some of it. Some of it mathematical. I think I'm going to read a poem that it's called A Conjecture, and it actually has to do with something I mentioned before, Fermat's last theorem. You don't really have to, I don't know whether this will make any sense to anyone who's not familiar with some of it, but Fermat's last theorem was a quite famous, unproven concept, which was very simple and was intriguing to anybody who was interested in mathematics. And it seemed like it should be easy to deal with, but the proof was notoriously difficult and caused lots of people to study mathematics, to get involved in it, try figuring it out, and all kinds of amazing work was done because of it, because this problem was insoluble, it seemed to be. Along the way, actually the way computers work today would have been impossible had it not been for the work, the sort of accidental work done while trying to solve this. It turned out that Fermat's last theorem was proven recently, about 5 years ago, which was sort of a disappointment to a lot of people. It was a very complex solution that it involved something called the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture. And Taniyama and Shimura were Japanese mathematicians, and there's this terribly sad story attached to one of them, and I do something with that in here. I guess that's all clear now. Sorry. You can ask questions after. I can explain what the Fermat last theorem was. just briefly, it's this. You know the thing about the square of the hypotenuse equaling the sum of the squares of the other two sides. So you can see that in the form a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And all of those can be whole numbers, like 3 squared, which is 9, plus 4 squared, which is 16, equals 5 squared, which is 25. The question is, if you keep all of these things whole numbers and you move the squared up to 3 and above, are there any numbers that make this work? A cubed, a to the n plus b to the n equals c to the n, where n is greater than 2. And the answer seems to be no, but it was extremely difficult to prove that. You could keep trying numbers, you could plug them in, and none of them would ever work, but that doesn't prove that the next number that you try wouldn't do it. It's very simple, but it's a real problem. And a mathematician named Fermat had a book in which that problem was written out. He's a French mathematician. And he wrote in the margin, "I have discovered a wonderful solution to the problem." And then he died. And people found the book later, and that's why it was given his name. So there. The point was much shorter. The conjecture. The heron resolves itself from the gray lake, the water. Conversely, the woman dissolves in sex, her own in liquefaction, but the flesh reforms like wings unfolded. Flight like light drips, glisten in the setting sun. The horizon, first above, now below. The bird, the evening, only local. The spinning earth flings its fluid surface, dissolving itself into itself, its ecstasy. The need we feel, each for each, the falseness of any world at all. It is a kind of patience, impossible to distinguish from lassitude. It is a kind of hope, indistinguishable from stupidity. I know a man who killed himself, and the woman he was about to marry killed herself a month later. He wrote a note. Until yesterday, I had no definite plan to kill myself. I do not understand it myself, but it is not because of a particular event, nor of an explicit matter. Every elliptic curve defined over the rational field is a factor of the Jacobian of a modular function field, was another note he wrote. I have his picture on my desk, a gray parallelogram, a thin man in black jacket, black tie, bifurcating a horizon behind him, the line just above his ears. This point of view, this lonely life there, is only a kind of barrenness in the background, and a sky, which is a world, of course, plenty. I know this is a bigger world than it was once, that it expands, an explosion. It can't help it. It has nothing to do with us, with whether we know or not, whether our theories can be proved, whether or not a Japanese mathematician knows a better class of circles in his mind than was ever known before. Not circles, elliptic curves, not donuts, not anything that is merely, only is. Such a world is hard to imagine, harder to live in, harder still to leave. A little like love, dear. I'm going to read one further last poem. However, it's one of those good news, bad news situations. It's kind of long. It's just 2.5 pages. So you can choose which of those is good and which is bad news. The poem grew out of an exercise. Actually, I had a creative writing class do. I have the class give the assignment that they have to write a poem in the form of 3 questions and 3 answers. But the questions have to be written on one sheet of paper and the answer on a separate one. And when they come into the next seminar, they get out the responses and they're getting ready to read them. And I have them send their list of answers to the person to the right. That way, you have to read your own question and someone else's answer and back and forth. We invariably all agree that the changed form is more interesting than the original. The addition of this randomness, what I think of it as being is inviting the world in, giving up some control of the work, allowing the random to be there, to be part of what it is that you're doing. Accepting the gift of the world is what happens. So I did it and got carried away. So what I have in front of us here is a bunch of questions and a bunch of answers. Sometimes the questions will go on, sometimes there'll be an answer, sometimes not. Usually there is. And they sort of do come together, I think, in a way. Oh, I also do a lot of work that quotes passages, takes language from other people, and I identify that when it happens here. Max Walter Spanberg is quoted. He was an American painter. John Clare, Joseph Cornell, an artist who made little boxes with moving objects in them, like toys. And you all know the question of if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one to hear, is there a sound? The title taken from Shakespeare's Sonnet 29, Trouble, Death, Heaven. Is there a sound? There is a forest. What is the world? The word is wilderness. What is the answer? The answer is the world. What is the beginning? A beginning is happiness. What is the end? No one lives there now. What is a beginning? The beginning is light. What makes happiness? Nothing. What makes an ending? What does not? What is her skin? Her skin is composed of strange clothing and clouds of butterflies, of events and odors, of the rose fingers of dawn, transparent suns of full daylight, blue loves of dusk, and night fish with huge eyes. Max Walter Sandberg. What makes a question? Birds in the evening. When do birds die? When it is complete. What makes a world? The leaves shimmer in the wind. They reverberate with small heat and large wind, and they cannot be counted. What is music? A man lives there with his sister. They count the buses passing their window, and they count the small winged insects which die on that windowsill. Who is happy? Nothing is necessary. Everything that is, is. When does it end? A green delight the wounded mind endears after the hustling world is broken off. John Clare. What is the beginning? The completion. How does it complicate? In that it dazzles. When does it matter? Blue loaves of dusk. What perishes? Who listens? There will be prizes. What is a child? Blue lives of dusk. Where does dust come from? From tropical skies. When is it over? Into childhood, into fantasy, through the streets of New York, through tropical skies, into the receiving trays, the balls come to rest, releasing prizes. Joseph Cornell. What does a child do? Listens with his body, with her body. When does it end? Listens with the hands. Does it end? The hands which are small and wide. Where do children come from? White pebbles. Who suffers? No one returns from there. Who suffers? There was once a small forest with a path of white pebbles and a tame group of frights and follies. Whoever entered knew the path would carry them to the other side, but that it would be scary and fun at the same time. No one who entered was ever seen again. Is there a sound? There is a forest. Who listens? The large lady with the small dog, she leans into the neighbor's yard to sniff the hydrangea once more, hoping this time it will have an odor, a sweetness which she feels such a desperate need for She is near despair. She is thinking of killing herself, except who would care for the dog? Who could know what he feels, what he needs, what his smelly bed in the corner actually means to him? What matters? There is a forest. Who listens? Another theory of the origin of the universe holds that matter is a way of thinking, a little like love, actually, if you think of it that way. What matters? There is a forest. What is the world? There is color, and no one knows what to do with it. We would be happier without it, is one theory. We are irresponsible and full of angers, like colors. What does the child think? The child. What does the child think? Happiness. What child? A word is a small part of itself. It is round at times, and it satisfies only itself. Does it answer? It does not. What is pain? A small island. Or perhaps it is a large island. The adjective is merely relative and a convenience. There are few inhabitants, one actually, ever at a time. And the sky's red would perhaps be beautiful if there were another, even a single other inhabitant. What is pain? A man turns and locks his door with exactly the same small dance of hands every morning at the same hour, and pockets the key, followed by a pat of the pocket with the hand which has just locked the door. Unknown to him, it is his life. It is the center and source of what he calls his life. It makes him what he is happy to call happy. Who suffers? Oh, it is true, there are causes of cruelty. It is that kind of world. What is geometry? It is how we know and what. What is the purpose of memory? Blue lines of dust. What is the cat when she yawns? What is dust? Does the child suffer? The child is suffering. Is the child cruel? The child crushes the world at will. The child destroys with angelic decorum. The child bleeds into his own drinking water and smiles to see color, a demon, and delirium. The child is born knowing and screaming, and there is pain in his fist when he enters, and there is pain as if the atoms which whirl, mad in their completeness, were tiny childbirths. And it is the cruelty of children which presses upon the innocent earth, and coal turns to diamond. What is to perish? What is to choose? What is to crush? Well, thank you for attending the services.
Professor Ramke, we're happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Don't feel obligated. Oh, well, yes?
Was the question and answer that you just read, was that comprised from the exercise you did in class, or did you write all of that yourself? Was that...
Oh, no, I did this one myself, yeah. No, I just responded to, after having them do it, it seemed like fun and it was interesting, and I just started playing with it myself, so, yeah. I didn't steal it from my students, but that's actually a good idea.
Do you feel torn between some impression of security in the mathematical world versus the insecurity of the human model?
I do now. That's very interesting. My interest in mathematics was in the kind of stuff that didn't really yield answers. I mean, it tended to be in ambiguous areas, and I liked, what's known as pure mathematics. But it is true that it was a realm of, mistakes never, hurt anybody. The sort of stuff that I was involved with. I guess I would say that's right. There's a kind of cleanness, purity to the sort of work that's beautiful in its way, but the world is also messy and dirty. It's an interesting contrast. Yeah. Probably won't sleep tonight.
been reading your interview in Portal of the West that came out last fall. And there are a few things that you mentioned in the interview that I are pretty interesting. For one, at one point you said that you thought that the business of collapsing genres is the most exciting element of poetry of this century. And I was wondering if you might, if you've given any thought to the implications for poetry as a genre with the advent of spoken word slam.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, so far it's a short century, so it's not like... No, actually, the interview was done in the 20th century. That's right. Well, to say the advent of spoken poetry and poetry slam, I mean, that's true. There is this new kind of phenomenon. But on the other hand, of course, it's related to the most ancient of any literary forms, including poetry as we know it. That is, oral poetry is apparently as old as the language itself. But the recent popularity and attention that oral poetry has received, I think is quite important. It's very interesting. It's interesting that you would bring it up because I feel that the work that I do is primarily connected with the page. For me, my work has a lot to do with the visual appearance, and it's a kind of visual art as well. You couldn't see. I'm sorry. I was going to hold something up. I do things, particularly in the most recent book and in new work, that actually deliberately subverts, as we like to say, reading. A simple matter would be making a poem in 2 columns. This is not original. John Ashbery actually has a wonderful poem that he did like that 20 years ago. But just the fact that you have 2 columns of text in front of you leaves the reader with a dilemma. Do you read the left column, then the right one? Do you read them simultaneously? Can't do that. Or are you supposed to read across? And I think that sort of encounter is an interesting kind of enactment of something there on the page. But if I were to read it aloud, I'd have to go ahead and make the choice for you. Well, I'm going probably further than you wanted me to. And that, as an answer to the question, what I'm saying is that I think there are very different forms of poetry. I happen to be interested in the kind that often relies on the page. I try to present it on these occasions, orally, but there's other stuff going on that you have to kind of see. Even to see the words, there are visual things that happen there that do matter in some way. But that doesn't mean I reject the other, and I think there's a great energy that has come out of spoken word poetry. There's an amazing man in Chicago. I just know him as Reggie. I'm not sure that I ever heard his last name. He actually was the winner of the most recent Chicago Poetry Slam, World Championship, whatever. And he's amazing. He's really quite wonderful. And it's the sort of thing that I can't do and can't hope to do. But I think I may have learned something from his work. Sapphire. Actually, these share a lot of one-word people involved in oral poetry. Not share, as far as I know, just Sapphire. She's also quite a wonderful writer who also has a novel book that's very moving. It happens that a lot of this work is in minority communities as well, particularly African American. And I have seen, even here on this recent trip, this is the 4th college and university in Georgia that I've been visiting this past week and doing readings. And at the University of Georgia and some other places, there's a really very active community of usually black African American poets involved in these oral poetry. And they're often really quite amazing to listen to. I could say further that performance art of one form or another is something that has been growing and is quite fascinating over the last several decades, I guess I would say. And just the last, not to get too carried away with all of this, but in some ways performance art, performance poetry, oral poetry, poetry slams are also related to activist political activities. And it's a fascinating sort of nexus. I think much of this came out of like 1960s anti-war or anti-Vietnam conflict, it was never called a war, and civil rights demonstrations, finding this use of language. It's part of this idea of wanting the words to do something. That. Thank you. You want the words to stop.